everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to My Horror Confessional, where every week I'll have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they have properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today in the confessional, we have Bob Pastorella. Bob is the co host of This Is Horror. He is the author of Mojo Rising, They're Watching with Michael David Wilson, and has short fiction in such anthologies as Warmed and Bound, a Velvet Anthology, The Booked Anthology, and Lost Films, among others online and print. He resides in Southeast Texas, where he's currently working on another vampire novel. Bob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. This sounds like a lot of fun and I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about you first. So Mojo Rising. Can you please tell me about that? It's a very interesting name.
Well, Mojo Rising's got like a weird little history to it. I was originally very inspired by True Detective, and I wanted to write a book that had similar themes to True Detective. And especially that first season, which was, groundbreaking. And at the same time, I went into a deep dive of the music of the Doors, and totally, completely unrelated.
Okay.
But as I was going through, listening to the Doors again, I noticed a theme, and I noticed a theme within titles of songs. And if you're like me, you like create playlist, right? And you take like your favorite songs of a band and you put them together as a playlist.
Mhm.
And I started noticing this theme, and almost immediately this story just popped in my head where I could use the titles of Door songs kind of thematically in different ways to create a story about a drug runner who's looking for his brother.
Mhm.
And so basically that's what happened was is I kind of abandoned the True Detective idea because this concept came to me all at once. There's like literally no notes for this or anything like that other than a playlist from the Doors.
Mhm.
And one of the first things I did was to see how much lyrically I could use legally without, enraging like John Densmore, who's, the Doors drummer, very much alive, very much active, and very protective of the Doors. So,
Litigious.
yes, yeah, he's fiercely protective of it. And that's why you don't hear much of their music in any type of commercials or things like that. Or even movies. It's like there's only certain songs that you can use, and you have to pay a lot for the rights. So, um, but I did some checks basically with some people and that who knew a little bit about legal and things like that and what I could use. And once I was confident that I wasn't gonna get like a bunch of cease and desist letters, I started pursuing the story, which again it was just fully formed in my head. And it's basically about a guy. He's a drug runner, and his brother's been missing, and there's a new drug in town called Mojo, and it's a form of meth. And he ends up taking this drug, Mojo, and once he takes it, it has a paradoxical effect. You have to take more of it to make the world seem normal. So, in other words, as you come down off this drug, you get more hallucinogenic effects.
Oh wow.
More, in other words, like you have to take this drug just to be normal again. So
Yeah.
once you take it, it's like the first time you pass through a doorway, and that you can't close that door. And it deals with some really rough
That sounds like
subjects.
meth.
Yeah, pretty much, and for someone who's never taken meth, I had to be really inventive with what the concept was.
Yeah.
But he goes through a lot of trials and tribulations, just looking for his brother. And so there's like landmark places like, Roadhouse Blues is basically, there's an abandoned movie theater that was converted to an apartment complex, which has been since abandoned, and meth heads hang out there. The there's another apartment complex where the song, five to one, 1 in 5, no one gets out of here alive. He finds out when his brother has been staying in this room 521. So there's a lot of themes there
Okay.
that, I've taken the songs and kind of twisted them to fit into this narrative.
Yeah.
And it deals with some pretty rough subject matter. One of the characters has sold her children to a dealer for mojo, and so he kind of takes it upon himself to save those kids.
Okay.
And he finds that out from a pretty rough cop, and he takes it upon himself to save those kids. That becomes part of his mission. And this is a guy who you should not like at all. He's a drug runner. He's been doing this his whole life. He knows nothing but drug running. He's basically, the guy who gets the drugs to the dealers. And so you should not like this guy at all. But he finds his purpose in saving those kids, and trying to find his brother. And there's a lot of surreal imagery. It gets a little cosmic, but it's it's, to me, it's one of my favorite things I've written. It's just it's a story that just keeps on going.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
So you also wrote a book with your podcast co-host Michael David Wilson, right? They're watching. So I want to hear a little bit about the podcast though. Can you tell me about the podcast? Because I've listened to the podcast before, but you guys are so prolific. Like you guys are on episode like 533 or something now.
Yeah.
But you have had so many like big name authors, and just like recently I was looking through the list, and like Daniel Krause, Richard Chismer, Josh Malerman, Stephen Graham Jones. Like, how are you guys getting these authors? I mean, and also like, I want to know, and I think I might have asked you this. We were on a panel earlier this year at not Fantastic Fest. I'm sorry. It was a fantastic festival, but at Ghoulish Book Festival. But I might have asked you this, but who is still out there? Who's the white whale that you're still looking for? So first, these authors, what's your connection here? How are you guys getting these authors?
Well, for Stephen Graham Jones, me and a lot of other writers that are, we see their names over and over again. Gabino Iglesias, Paul Tremblay. We were all part of a small internet group called The Velvet. And that was basically a website that was devoted. It was a spring off of The Cult, which was Chuck Palahniuk's website.
Okay.
And so, and which The Cult and The Velvet basically led to Lit Reactor. So, but The Velvet was a website that was basically a homage to the writings of Will Christopher Bear, Craig Clevenger, and Stephen Graham Jones. And it was basically like a Discord forum. But what was cool is these authors were there. They were there to interact with. You could ask them, a question, things like that, about writing, about whatever, about movies they'd seen, anything. And there were long and deep, far-reaching conversations, sometimes till 4:00 in the morning, chatting with people. And Stephen Graham Jones was very, very prolific on there. And so, being part of that, so knowing Stephen online for years and years and years, it made it, very easy to reach out to him and say, hey, would you like to be on This Is Horror? And he was like, yes, definitely. And so that was how we got him on there. When, Josh Malerman, Michael published The House at the Bottom of the Lake, that he was the original publisher of that. So This Is Horror
Okay.
originally published that. And so we had a really good, relationship with Josh. We still do. Josh is a lot of fun. He's pretty easy to get on the podcast because of our friendship, and it's we can't even stay on topic with Josh. He's all over the place. He's a lot of fun. But it's a matter of reaching out to to the right people and talking to them, and trying to get schedules and
Yeah.
things. And so, between me living in Texas and a lot of the other people living on the east or west coast, and then Michael living
He's in
in
Japan.
Japan,
Yeah.
yeah, it's you really you have to have your times right, So, but
Yeah.
you
That's
have to
cool.
explain to Michael what Central Time is, how daylight savings time works, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, screw you Americans, but yeah,
Yeah, so
but
then who's
yeah, that's how we got it.
and who's the white whales who's still out there?
Well, I mean, there's several. I mean, obviously Stephen King.
Mhm.
Stephen doesn't need to be on our podcast. We probably need him to be on ours, but we're hoping that would probably be the one. That's probably the biggest name that
Okay.
we'd love to have on the show. You know, um, but it's we just have to figure out a way to do it,
Yeah.
and to where it's beneficial, for him and for us.
Right.
And but yeah, we would be honored. For me personally, it's weird because I've actually managed to talk to a lot of my literary heroes in horror. If you told me, 10 years ago that I would be having a conversation with Kathy Koja, I would be like, you're crazy. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But I've had multiple conversations with her. So, that's, that was one of my white whales. Another with Peter Straub, but he's passed away. We never had an opportunity to get him on the podcast.
Mhm.
We had, but then he had scheduling issues and stuff like that. So things come up, but yeah, and for me, and I'm pretty sure Michael, it's Stephen King, you know, um, and we'd be grateful for an hour. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Joe Hill has been on the show before I became part of This Is Horror, but and I think that was like maybe a 15-20 minute interview or something like that. I think it was done live, if I'm not mistaken. I'd
Mhm.
like to have him on, for the full thing,
Yeah.
his early life lessons would be hilarious. I have a feeling.
You got to talk to him
So
about being in Creep Show.
yeah.
So for those who don't know, could you tell us what This Is Horror is about? What you guys do at This Is Horror?
Well, what This Is Horror is that it's just like our preamble says, it's a podcast for writers, readers, and creators. Basically, we like to talk to creators, whether they're writers, filmmakers, podcast host, anybody who's involved in horror fiction, primarily creators, and we want to talk to them about the creative process. And I think that we found our secret to that is examining what their early life lessons. Everyone has a early life lesson that has shaped and formed a foundation of what they bring to the table. And so we're interested in a deep dive of that. And I think that kind of sets us apart from the other podcasts because we are willing to talk about those early formations of horror, those inspirations, those first times that you started writing. And it's amazing because you would think that a lot of it would be the same, and there is a lot of overlap, but everyone has an individual and distinct and very personal story, and we love getting into that. We love breaking that down, and I think that's what kind of sets us apart from the other podcasts. Um, it allows us to follow tangents into really really interesting areas. And Michael is always, he does most of the questions, and I tend to build off of those.
Hmm.
I used to have my own set of questions. I found that they overlapped with Michael's. And even if we tried to sit down and say, "Hey, you ask these and ask these," the answers would overlap. So I found it better just to to come in and say, "Hey, let's talk about this weird thing that happened to you, this strange way that you do things." I'm always interested in different paths that writers take to get the words on the page. I want to see how they do that, and I think that's every writer's different, so it's not like we're doing the same show over and over and over again. It's always different, it's always interesting, and it's always exciting, and I just love
Yeah.
doing it.
And to kind of, I mean, it's a perfect segue to talk about you and your kind of like early life lessons. So, what I want to know what your history with horror is. Did you grow up liking it? Did you grow up hating it? Did you have a tight knit group of horror heads that you would watch movies with, that sort of thing?
Well, I didn't have a tight knit group of horror heads. Being in Southeast Texas, over, especially in school, sports is a real big thing, and I wasn't
Yeah.
a very sporty kid. I was frail when I was younger, had asthma, wore glasses,
What's wrong with
just didn't
glasses?
really. Yeah. Well, yeah, I wear
Nah, just
contacts
kidding.
now. I still wear glasses, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's that I was very much a bookworm, um, and so my experience with horror started with kind of comics, um, you know, going into like the early comics like Man Thing, Swamp Thing, Tales of Dracula, which introduced me to Blade and introduced me to Morbius, um, and then just kind of springboarding from there. I remember one of my earliest memories is watching. They only played it on regular channels after 9 o'clock because of its content, but Night Gallery and especially Cool Air, that particular episode had especially at the very end, there's some striking imagery, and it has stuck with me
Hmm.
for
Okay.
my entire life.
I don't think I've heard of that program.
Well, it was Night Gallery was Rod Serling doing basically a color version of the Twilight Zone, but more geared to horror.
Okay.
And so I think there's 3 seasons, and it all started with basically him walking around in a gallery and showing off paintings, and then there was a story associated with the painting. And so and it had a lot of people, um up and coming stars and stars of the 70s that were involved in this, and it was it's very 70s, but some of the imagery is nightmarish.
Okay.
Between that and another film which is really got me kind of scarred me was Let's Scare Jessica to Death.
Great
um
movie. I've done it on the podcast before. Yeah.
yeah, and
Did
that
it with
one
Susan Snyder, I
really
think. Maybe,
uh
maybe.
I'm trying to think, and man, I can't remember her name. I do know this, that the main actress was also Kinderman's wife in The Exorcist 3. So
Okay, okay,
yeah,
yeah.
Zora something. I can't, man. Golly, man. If I wouldn't have been thinking about it, I'd be able to remember her name.
Yeah.
Um, but she played Kinderman, played by George C. Scott in Exorcist 3. She played his wife, and yeah,
That's
and then
Zora Lampert's.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's
Okay.
her.
IMDb. I did not know that. I just looked that up.
But yeah,
Okay.
that movie, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, man, it scarred me.
Yeah.
And it's
Great
I think
twist.
it still holds up today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I saw it within the last year. I saw it for the first time a couple years ago, but did it for the podcast, and it holds up a lot.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
really good. If you guys haven't seen that, watch Let's Scare Jessica to Death and then hear my episode on it because it was great.
All right.
So Bob is here to confess his horror sin of never having watched Blood and Black Lace. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how did this particular movie pass you by?
Well, I had heard about it. Well, writing They're Watching with Michael David Wilson, I realized that we were writing a Giallo.
Mm.
And I realized that a lot of my favorite movies from the 70s were Giallos. And so I'm one of those people. Once I realized that that I've been into something and don't, and didn't know what it was, I start doing like a deep dive into it. So I started rewatching a lot of these movies that I really enjoyed. And of course, and I tend to, take the Wikipedia rabbit hole and start looking at, the history of things and things like that. I want to know what makes it tick. And so I have realized that there are a ton of Giallos I've never seen.
Mm.
There's probably a ton of them that I'll never be able to watch. There's probably even a handful of them that I probably don't want to watch. But for some reason, this movie kept popping up in list of Giallos. And I'm like, well, one day I'll get to it. And it's like hindsight's 2020. I regret not watching it sooner because it seems like it's one of those movies that informs a genre. And so, it's listed as a Giallo. I would say that it's probably a proto Giallo, probably
Mm.
like very early. I'm a big fan of Dario Argento. Um, and so, good or bad, I pretty much like all his movies. And there's still, again, there's a handful of movies of his that I haven't seen, mainly just because they're hard to get your hands on.
Mm.
But that's one of my things is that one of my goals is to watch as many of these influential giallos that I can.
Yeah.
And because I love the genre. And the crazy thing is they're still being made today. Most people like, oh yeah, there's 70s Italian horror movies. No, they're still making giallos today.
Oh yeah.
People are still writing giallos. It's a niche name, so you really don't want to,
Malignant. I mean, Malignant came out like 2 years ago.
Right.
Right. That's Giallo. I mean, and then you have like
Oh yeah.
Knife Plus Heart, which is a French Giallo. Well, when
Mm-hmm.
when Giallo starts branching out into other countries, like the Spanish Giallo and the French Giallo, like those are great as well. Yeah, I'm a huge fan
Right.
of Giallo as well.
Yeah. It took me a while to realize that there was something that had a name for something I like. It's like when I discovered what urban weird was. I was like, oh, what? There's actually a name for something I like. Wow,
Yeah,
it's so exciting that someone termed it.
yeah,
And so, but yeah, that's even urban weird is even more niche than Giallo. Giallo to me is not that niche. It's just it's not a name that you want to carefully throw it around if you're trying to label your own work as a Giallo.
mm,
Me and Michael went back and forth as should we name and should we say that They're Watching was a Giallo. And so based upon the description that he put into the book when it landed on Amazon, it's listed as an erotic thriller. Uh, which there's like no two people have sex in this book, but there is sexy times.
okay.
So
So it's like
yeah, so
three or four people at once.
no,
Oh,
no.
all
No,
right, okay,
more like I am the master of my own domain type thing. Yeah.
gotcha.
So yeah.
Okay,
Solo efforts. Yes, we'll
yeah.
call them that. Yeah.
Okay, so how can people follow you? How can they support your work? How can they follow the podcast? All that sort of stuff.
Well, the best way to follow the podcast is actually through the website, which is thisishard.co.uk. I believe you can still get there to thisishard.com. But the primary address is going to be the co.uk. You follow me. I am after November 8th, I will no longer be on Twitter. That is my dead date. And
Okay.
so but I am on Blue Sky at Bob Pastorella. You can find me there. I do have a newsletter that is occasionally updated, and that's into the let me say it right, into the Obscuradrome. If you search that, you can definitely find my Substack and for my newsletter. And please subscribe. I'm try to be, now that I don't have Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, I'm gonna try to be a little bit more active on there. I am on Threads, but not as active. I'm just I'm real careful about just I don't like a lot of their policies. So
Social media is, yeah, it's a hellscape. So I don't blame you for getting off Twitter or anything like that. Like I don't really use Twitter, only to promote the show, and maybe even
right.
won't be using it for that much longer. So I completely understand. But how can they buy your book? How can they get Mojo Jojo? I'm sorry, Mojo Rising.
Mojo Rising is on Amazon. You can search it. There's another book called Mojo Rising, but it's not by me.
Okay,
Um,
don't buy that one.
and yeah, and I think they actually, mine has the G at the end because the way the song is Mojo Rising without the G. Um, so mine has the G at the end, Rising, and so you can search it that way. It's definitely on Amazon. And I know They're Watching is also on Amazon. I believe They're Watching is a Kindle Unlimited too.
Okay.
So we highly recommend if you order Mojo Rising and you get the paperback edition of it, it does come with a bonus prequel short story that's called Pork Chop, which kind of sets some of the things in motion. There's only one. Well, there's more than one. There's only one character who's alive, who's in both stories.
Oh, okay,
So
that's cool.
yeah,
That's a great
so
concept.
yeah, and but it's kind of a prequel, and it's not supernatural, but it is a rough. It's another rough story.
Okay,
So, but I would say I don't even say Mojo Rising is supernatural. It could be. It's ambiguous.
okay,
You could
cool,
be under the influence, and you could not be under the influence. Who knows?
cool. All right, so let's get started talking about Blood and Black Lace from 1964. So this was directed by Mario Bava. Blood and Black Lace is considered to be actually the second Giallo ever made. Other Giallos have been like they made a movie. I think The Postman Rings Twice, which was uh, um, a movie that was made from a Giallo, but it's not the same genre that we come today to know as Giallo. So from what I was reading, um, Blood and Black Lace is considered to be the second Giallo after The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which was also by Mario Bava, that came out the year before, 1963. The same year that he released Black Sabbath, which has the telephone segment. I'm not sure if you've seen Black Sabbath. It's a great movie, and it's an anthology film. And the first segment is a telephone. Well, if you're watching the original Italian version, not the Americanized stupid version that they released, the telephone segment is the first segment, and that is very much like proto Giallo as well, right? And that's that movie, that not that segment, but Boris Karloff is the host for Black Sabbath. And then he also released in the same year The Whip and the Body, starring Christopher Lee. So like Bava is like, if you don't know Bava, Mario Bava, he is like one of the masters. He's great. And like you were saying earlier, but Blood and Black Lace introduced a number of elements that became emblematic of the genre. A masked stalker with a shiny weapon in his black gloved hand who brutally murders a series of glamorous fashion models. Though the movie was not a financial success at the time, the tropes it introduced, including like bold use of color and provocative sexuality, all would become iconic of the genre. And then some of the other movies he made was like Bay of Blood, which was a huge inspiration for Friday the 13th, along with Halloween. And then he also made Lisa and the Devil. So Mario Bava is definitely somebody that you want to look into if you haven't talk to listeners, if you haven't like watched his movies. So also written by Marcello Fondato and Giuseppe Barilla. Trying to pronounce, I don't speak Italian. Do you speak Italian, Bob? I don't know if I'm pronouncing this.
No, other than foods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
And the story and the screenplay by both Marcello Fondato and Giuseppe Barilla, and English translations by Eva Bartok, who was Contessa Christiana Cuomo in this movie.
Mhm.
So the Bava and the other writers didn't know English, and like you were saying, they were trying to do some uh, dialogue in English, and none of it was making sense because they don't know English. So Eva translated everything because she spoke, I think, 4 languages, and so she ended up writing the English translation. So she got a credit for that. And then
Mhm.
the music was done by Carlo Rusticelli, which great music. I absolutely loved the music in this movie. So the cast was Eva Bartok as Contessa Christiana Cuomo, Cameron Mitchell as Massimo Morlacchi, Thomas Rayner as Inspector Silvestri, Ariana Gorini as Nicole, Mary Arden as Peggy Payton, Leah Kruger as Greta, and then Claude Dantes as Tao Lee. It's very important for you to know that Claude Dantes is not Asian. Claude Dantes replaced the actress Yoko Tani, and the replacement for Tani was a hasty decision. She was supposed to be played by an actual Asian person, Yoko Tani, of Japanese descent. Instead, they had this white actress in Asian face. Also starring Dante De Paolo as Franco Scalo, Massimo Righi as Marco, Franco Ressel as Marchese Riccardo Morelli, Luciano Pigozzi as Cesare Lasserini, and Giovanni Raffaelli as Inspector Zankin, and Francesca Ungaro as Isabella. The movie starts with some colorful, like out of focus lights, and we could tell that me immediately, I could tell like I'm in for some Giallo. And we got some like bossa nova swag, and the fucking colors are great. Like, I don't know, like I think it's the fact that the colors is one of the main draws for me with Giallo, just because it's so bold and daring, and like with horror movies, a lot of time it's dark all the time, right? And to
Mhm.
see some contrast to that really like sets the mood for you, but also kind of like takes you out of it because you're like, well, this feels otherworldly. How do you feel
Mhm.
about their use of color?
I love it. And I love that it's basically these primary colors of red and blue. You do see them kind of blend together sometimes. You do see some green, you do see some purple, which is really kind of strange. You would think that because giallo is Italian for yellow, that you would see a lot of yellow, but yellow is good for book covers, things like that. It's a good static color. It's a color that doesn't move around. The original Giallo books were actually yellow backgrounds with lurid images on the front, on the cover. So I when I see a movie, any film that starts focusing on blue or red, then I know that even though it may not be a giallo, I realize that the creators are trying to tap into a vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's like one of the first things you would notice in a giallo. Just because your film has red and blue hues doesn't make it a giallo, but and you're kind of leaning in that direction, I
Yeah.
think. And so the bold use of color, it's a hallmark of the genre. These giallos came from these West German films called krimis. I'm probably not saying that right, or krimis. And so those were primarily in black and white when they first came out, just because there wasn't much color film at the time, or it was very expensive to do that. And these films are basically low budget films that are mysteries, probably more expressionistic than what you would find in film noir and things like that. You mentioned The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is the classic film noir, but it definitely leans to giallo in a lot of ways because of the content, not because of the way it was produced, but more or less the content of it. It's convoluted story. Um, the plot is tenuous. Somebody could have left at any time. You know what I mean? It's like, well, fuck this, I'm out. So
Yeah.
uh, there's to me, and that's one of the hallmarks is the plot is not so much important. It doesn't really even have to make sense. Um, it's got to be, but for the characters, it makes all the sense in the world. That's the to me the draw of a giallo when it comes to the story. And so like you actually, diagram the plot, you'd be like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever read, but for the characters, it was paramount that they made the events in the story happen the way that they did. because especially in Blood and Black Lace, it's a very convoluted story. They've taken a mystery and twisted it around to where when you get to the final reveal, in any other way, it would have been like, oh, well, okay, whatever. But since it's in the way that it's presented, it actually heightens the suspense, and so it's actually pretty cool. The
Yeah.
reveals are like, wow, okay, this is, I didn't see that coming, and then when you realize what's going on, you're like, oh wow, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying
Well,
not to spoil it, but yeah, I don't
yeah, I
know.
got you.
Do we spoil them here or what?
We're gonna get
Yeah.
all into it. We're gonna get all
Okay.
into
Okay.
it.
Cool. Yeah.
So, we open and it's basically just a bunch of mannequins with the people standing next to them, like the actors and actresses from the movie. Looks great, but really nothing happening there. It's just visuals for the
Mm-hmm.
credits. Now the actual movie starts, and it's a dark and stormy night. Great place to start. And we see it's the House of Couture, Christian House of Couture, and you could tell like these Italian movies when they set them in like uh high fashion, like they're always so beautiful, like elaborate, like gold gilding everywhere, just amazing stuff. So it looks beautiful. Love being in this world. The wind is blowing very hard and it knocks off the sign from the hinges, and we see the mansion, the House of Couture. People are walking inside. A woman walks out and she kind of looks into the night. She sees a man far off in the distance, hiding behind a tree. The man waves to her and she runs out to him. Basically says, "What's gotten into you? You didn't realize that Isabella could see us." The man says, asks basically for drugs, right? They're all like saying, "You got any? You have any?" Which I was very surprised to find out about. In 1964, this movie revolves around one of the plots of this is drugs. It's basically cocaine,
Right.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
which was very, I think, you always think of cocaine as like a current problem, or like it showed up in the 80s or something like that. But no, it's been around
Right.
for a very long time. It was in Coca-Cola, you know?
Yeah.
So basically we find out that they're drug addicts and they need a drug, they're out of it. Um, so she says, basically, to this man's name is Franco. She says, "Don't be like that, Franco. Have you asked Isabella?" And he says the last time he spoke to her, they argued, and she stole what he had. So um, he leaves. She goes back inside, and then Isabella arrives in a taxi, and or she arrives and she gets out of the taxi, and she starts walking into the night. And as she starts walking, we see the reflection of a man in a pool behind her. And she's
Mm-hmm.
walking home alone at night. It's dark. She's going down an empty path, and the shot looks absolutely beautiful. It's like it's backlit. She's in the foreground. No, she's in the background. Sorry, walking towards us, and there's a tree like right in the middle of the path, and right behind the tree they set up this huge light. It's just back. Looks absolutely amazing. I love it.
It's like the trees make a tunnel. That
Yes.
was that. It was like they make this tunnel, and I mean, it's like that has to be naturally occurring. They probably didn't make that for a movie. He probably just saw the shot and said, "Hey, I'm shooting there."
Yeah.
But with the backlit light and her walking, stunning imagery and
Mhm.
very giallo, very
Yeah.
giallo.
And Mario Bava, before he became a director, he was a cinematographer, and he did
Mm-hmm.
the cinematography on a lot of his movies as well. So he understood how to set up a shot, right? And you could tell with this movie because there's a couple of them. Specifically, later on, there's a shot with a purse in the foreground and like a fashion show happening in the background. Looks great, and we'll get to that. But suddenly the lights go out, and she's in pure darkness. She's wearing this beautiful red leather trench coat, and the man in the dark is following behind her and going tree by tree, and he's wearing a gray mask like this, I was thinking like Rorschach from uh dang that it went from my head, but the comic
Watchmen.
Watchmen, thank you, yes, but obviously without the black splotches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I found out in researching that movie that that look for the killer, which we're going to see the man, he's got black trench coat, black gloves, and a mask. That actually comes from another movie that came out in 1950. It's a Mexican film called El Hombre Sin Rostro, which basically means the man without a mask, and that was directed by Juan Bustillo Oro. So that's the thing about like trivia. I'm sorry, that's the thing. Sorry about Giallo is, and then horror movies in general, it all borrows from other places, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it borrows, and if you're making, if you're doing a good job, you're making it better, right? So that's what they did here, right? So this look from a Mexican film would inspire Bava to make his film, and his film inspired the whole genre of other people to make Giallo. So it's just like, I love when that comes together,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like Black Christmas with like slasher movies and Halloween and stuff like that, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So so basically she's walking and he attacks her, and he attacks her with like a wire, right? And like it basically chokes her and she falls to the floor dead. And he continues to drag her into the darkness. It was a pretty brutal attack, but that's what happens in Giallo. Not excusing it, but there is tons of violence against women in
mm-hmm.
Giallo. Very graphic violence as the genre moves forward. Speaking of Dario Argento, like he's done some terrible stuff to women in movies and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just recently, I had seen it before, but at the Draft House Terror Tuesdays, they showed Opera, and I never seen it
Oh
on
wow.
35 millimeter, and I had to see it, and it was great. But in the big screen, just like that, those pins on her eyes, like just fantastic, horrible stuff.
Yes.
But so the name of the movie in Italian is actually "Sei Donna per l'Assassino," Six Women for the Killer. But in the
Right.
American film, they named it Blood and Black Lace, and they got it from this image which we're seeing right now. When she's being dragged, the model, um, she's wearing black lace underwear, and blood's coming out of her mouth. So blood and black lace.
Right. When I was watching it too, like, and I watched it twice. The first time on this very first kill, this first incident, I didn't originally catch why he was strangling her, and then that she had blood on her face. I was like, that's to me, that just seems like what I mean, did he scratch her? That's one hell of a scratch. And then I noticed that she had these three distinct
Yeah, you're right.
marks on her face. And so usually in giallos, the thing that the killing instrument is actually almost like a character in the movie. And so instead of showing the killer, they'll show the knife of the killer, you know. And a lot of times you get a close up of a knife, like hanging in the air right before it comes down, you know. And so in this particular movie, the killer wears like this three-pronged claw, and it's like it's almost like a glove.
Mhm.
And you don't see it at first. You see what it does at first, but as you go, each kill, then you start to see more and more of this claw. And I was like, that's definitely a hallmark thing that you would see a trope in Giallo, is that the weapon, it almost becomes a character.
Yeah.
Um,
But
and that's
they don't use it. Sorry to interrupt you. They don't use it like throughout the whole movie. Only like the first couple kills is used with
right.
that claw, and then he just kind of they just abandon it.
Yeah, but it's I didn't even notice it the first time. So I'm
Yeah.
almost like, okay, it was there. You don't really see it until later. Then you actually see it. But of course, they use other kills too. Burning, that was, that was rough.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Suffocation.
yeah, so yeah, it's, that's to me, that's when you look at these giallos, the difference between a giallo and a slasher. And I'm gonna pick on slashers. I'm not a big fan of slashers. Slashers are like giallos, but they don't get it
Hmm.
right. So they're like, hey, yeah, we got to have inventive kills, and most slashers usually have inventive kills. That's the thing, is they don't care about the aesthetic of it. They focus on the actual violence. Whereas a giallo, the kills are almost secondary to the setting, you know,
Yeah.
to the setting. It's like, we're going to kill someone and it's going to be fucking beautiful when we do it. It's going to be gorgeous,
Yeah.
and we're going to have a lot of color, and it's going to be very dramatic. And so that's, to me, it's almost like the violence is almost secondary to the setting. Whereas in a slasher, it's all about the violence.
Mm.
And so that's not why I'm a fan. And not that's not why I don't like slashers. Uh, I primarily don't like movies where every character is totally despicable and they should all die. That's the way I
Yeah.
feel about most slashers.
Yeah,
Is
especially like
uh,
they got derivative of each other after a while. You know, mid to late 80s and into the 90s. Yeah, there's gems in there. And I grew up slashers
mhm.
were my entry point into horror movies, but I agree. Yeah, it's like it gets when you're watching a movie only for the kills, it gets kind of repetitive after a while.
Right. And it's like, my favorite slashers are like the original ones, the original Friday the 13th. Actually like the first three movies. After that, I don't care if he goes to hell or Manhattan or space. It's to me, it's all the same.
Yeah.
I like the first Scream movie. I've heard good things about the latest one that came out, and I still haven't seen it. I like Black Christmas. I like the first in the series, usually the best.
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of Nightmare on Elm Street because that's a supernatural slasher, and that's probably about as close to some kind of weird meld of slasher and giallo that you can get in America. You know, uh, of course, the purists would say it's supernatural. It can't be a Giallo, which I disagree with
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. But
So then you think that you do think Suspiria is Giallo?
oh yeah, no doubt, yeah. It's if it walks like a Giallo and talks like a Giallo, then it must be a Giallo. Just because it's also supernatural doesn't take away the fact that it's got pretty much every single Giallo trope that you can possibly name in there. But for purists, they're like, oh, but it's supernatural. No, shut up.
Yeah.
It's Giallo.
Yeah. So okay, so back to the movie. Inside, we're in the House of Couture. A bunch of models are walking around. So a lot of times when they're having a conversation, they'll be trying to lay the groundwork for why you think that this person is suspicious. So for the example, Countess Christiana says that Isabella is late, and Mr. Morlacchi were introduced to him. He says it's just fine. It's fine. Just fine her for being late. And then there's a bunch of models preparing for a modeling show. Um, Christiana grabs one of the dresses that one of the models left lying on the ground and kind of yells at her for, not taking care of the wardrobe, whatever. Um, but then she walks over to the wardrobe to put the clothes away, and she opens it up and she sees the dead body of Isabella in there, and it's all modeled in purple. Looks fantastic. Looks absolutely great.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like this is where we see like Michael Myers stuffing bodies into closets and stuff like that. Like
Right.
this is kind of like where we see that, but later the ambulance shows up and they take the body away, but in the ambulance the body looks completely different from when it looked how it looked in the closet. The closet, like I said, looked modeled and it was purple, and in the ambulance it's white in there and her face just looks like a dead person. So don't
Mm-hmm.
know what they're going for there, but it was cool. um so then police are questioning everybody, um and then they say, how was Isabella like, and then pretty much nobody had bad things to say about her. um he says to ask the women that she lived with. So inside, the managing director, introduces Inspector Silvestri to Countess Christiana, who's the owner of the company, and everybody inside is kind of bereft at the death. But the inspector recognizes Christiana from her husband's accidents, which I didn't think, like, I liked that this was kind of like almost a throwaway line. They did a really good job of making you forget about it. For
Right.
me, like I had seen this movie, it's maybe 10 years ago, so this is basically a new movie for me. Um, and I kind of like I noted it in my mind, and then it never came up again. Then I kind of forgot about it. Um, so then the inspector asks for Christiana's help, but she says this isn't a boarding school. She doesn't know what people do when they're not here, and then so she kind of excuses herself. So
Mm-hmm.
Inspector Silvestri asks the man around what time. Yeah, so basically he's just questioning people about what's happening here. So then we're introduced to Marquise Ricardo Morelli. He's one of the model's fiancés. He shows up and is questioned by the inspector on whether he knew the victim or not. He says he was kind of introduced to her once, but you can tell like there's something there. Inspector Silvestri questions Peggy, the only one who seems to be upset about the death, because they live together. Then we meet Cesar Lazzarini. He's a fashion designer that says that everybody knows who Isabella's lover was. It was Franco Scalo, the famous antique dealer. So you can tell they're dropping hints that like there's love triangles here and there's like secrets
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that, which actually becomes a thing later on in the movie. Like everything that's told here is for a reason. There's not really many very throwaway lines. It's
No.
very efficient.
Mm-hmm. Nothing's wasted. It's presented in such a way though that it just seems like, hey, we're just going from one point to another. But no, these are important. These connections that we're making in our unconscious are important to solving the mystery later. In other words, like when we have these aha moments, as they get to the reveal, it's like, oh, so that's why that happens. And so very, very efficient storytelling.
Yeah. Really enjoyed that part, that aspect of it. So later, the inspector is questioning Franco Carlo at his business, and it's at this point that I realized that the sound design is great in this movie. Like a lot of times, because they're trying to build up anticipation and dread and suspense, the score and the music would just be gone. It'll just be silent besides what's happening on screen, and you'll hear like them walking down a corridor, walking on gravel, and it sounds great. But also other aspects of it too, like the wind rustling in the background. Just like I love
Mm-hmm.
little parts of that add to the suspense and the dread of a movie, and I really like what the sound designer did here. So then, so he's questioning him, questioning Franco Carlo. He questions him on his relationship with Isabella, and he says they were friends, and he asks whether you were you lovers. So at that point, the inspector is holding what appears to be a small tab of cocaine, and asks Franco if he knows what it is, but Franco denies it. He's like also kind of like licking his lips because he fucking
Yeah.
hated it. Yeah. So the inspector says they found it in Isabella's house, but he denies knowing anything about it. So the inspector just basically tells him, "Don't leave," and then he don't go anywhere. Be available when I need you." And then the inspector leaves. Later at the fashion show, Christiana is having a hard time finding another model to wear Isabella's dress, but a model named Nicole accepts. And at this time, Marco goes in the back and takes a bump of cocaine. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, everybody's on cocaine here, which I'm sure, like, I've heard of like modeling industry, like, that is true. That maybe not so much anymore, but I remember like I heard stories about like in the 80s and the 90s, like all the models were on cocaine and stuff like that. So it was supposedly happening since the 60s, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember reading some of the, I guess, crime fiction from the 50s and stuff like that, where drugs were kind of put into play. Um, and even like it's like if you look at the like if you read the Godfather, which was I think actually set in the 60s. Um, that was one thing that Don Corleone did not want to mess with was drugs. Because he had so many, politicians in his pocket and things like that, that it was really tough for, a mob boss to be involved in something that they considered a dirty trade.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of that, but the media kind of blew that out of proportion in the 80s, you know, and rightfully so. I mean, I think everyone has had their, tangle with the mess, and it become basically an epidemic that is never ended.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but it is kind of weird to see it in this film being portrayed so much.
Hmm.
It's a plot device. It kind of almost it excuses the despicable personalities of these people that we're dealing with. where it seems like everyone has an ick factor in here. There's no person who's actually a good person except for the inspector, and his team.
Mm.
Um, and the inspector keeps everything close to the vest. I think he figures out what's going on. He just doesn't have any proof what's
Mm.
going on. And
Yeah.
so, and usually a good police officer, they're not going to reveal their hand. They're gonna hold all their information in until basically he's going to let the people involved give himself, he gives them enough rope to hang themselves with.
Yeah.
And so, that's why he doesn't, he seems almost kind of passive in that respect.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned earlier, when they're at the fashion house, and he recognizes her, and he's like, where do I know you from? And she tells him, his expression doesn't change. And that's interesting to note because he already knew the answer. He wanted to see if
Mm.
she knew.
Okay.
And
If she
so
admit
that's
or she admitted to it.
right, or she
Yeah.
admitted to it.
Yeah.
And so his expression barely even makes a register of that. But it's one of those scenes that, it's like if you linger on something long enough, it's important. And so I think Baba was saying, hey, this is important. You need to watch this, you
Yeah.
know. And that's a hallmark of Giallo is they're going to linger on a scene just long enough for you to go, okay, I need to remember this. This is important shit,
Yeah.
you know. And like with the purse and things like that, which is just fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And before I forget, I got to mention that, and I'll probably bring it up later, but I noticed a lot of things that I see in Brian De Palma films in this movie.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And Brian De Palma in the 70s and 80s was probably the closest American director that we got to Giallos. Um, and so I see a lot of things that inspired him. Uh, and of course there's a lot of things in this movie that have inspired so many other movies. It's
Yeah.
you can shake a stick at it and you'll be shaking for a minute. You know what I mean? There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. When we come across a shot that you think maybe, or if you remember a shot that maybe a Brian De Palma took inspiration from, let me know. I'd love to hear. But I do see the vibe in general is or at least early Brian De Palma, right? So then they noticed that there was a green brooch missing. I always forget how
Roach.
to brooch. Yeah, brooch
Mm-hmm.
missing from Isabella's dress. Then they kind of look in all these boxes to find it. Nicole ends up finding it in a box along with a red leather notebook, which happens to be Isabella's diary. When this is said, multiple people stare directly in the camera and are very concerned, and there's like musical stings accompany it. And I'm like, oh, okay, we need to, just like you said, we need to understand that this diary spells trouble for lots of people.
Right.
Yeah. So, for example, we see Cesare is worried, Christiana's worried, Peggy, they're all worried. Nicole starts reading from the diary, but Christiana scolds her, saying, "Does this look like the right time to go to read this? No, obviously not. Go off and get ready for the show." So they decide to turn it to the police, but Nicole wants to be the one to do it, so she puts it in her purse, and we notice Peggy looking at her purse after she does so. So then there's this very great shot that we're talking about. It's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting, it's a static shot of her purse. She puts it on a table in the foreground, and then in the background is the runway, and she goes and does her runway thing. Love this shot. It's a brilliant shot. I know you were talking about it earlier. What did you think of it?
And I like
So
these shots
simple.
where they focus on something and they have all this stuff in the background, and you're forced to pay attention to the stuff in the background. And so it's kind of like it's very psychological because you can't take, like in this scene, you can't take your eyes off the purse.
Mm.
And so they're training you to watch this purse. And so, and you see Nicole, she goes and gets in line and she goes up the stairs. You can see that in the background. I paid attention to, what she was doing in the background. And she does the runway walk because they're doing a fashion show. And so she does the runway walk and she comes back around and she goes to the purse and I can't tell what she does, but they specifically show her fingers touch near the purse.
Mm.
And then that's when she goes and she calls Franco
Yeah.
and Franco's, he's in the throes of addiction. He can't, he's, when you're withdrawing, you feel ill. And so he doesn't even want to get out of the house. And he's so sick that when he calls back, she doesn't recognize his voice. Because he's going through, withdrawals. And this is like severe cocaine addiction shit, you know. And so they're just basically showing how addicted these people are without showing them actually doing drugs or anything like that. But she mentions that she has the diary on the phone call. And so her purse is still out on the table. You can't stop thinking about it
Yeah.
because they've shown it so well. And you're like going, this, her purse is still out on the table. Someone is messing with that purse. And then there's a shadow that comes up behind Nicole while she's on the phone call. So you know that someone heard her say that they found Isabella's diary.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets Franco really interested in coming to there. Like, I'm on my way type shit. I may be going through withdrawals, but I'm on my way. And of course he calls back. He can't make it. He's jacked up.
Yeah.
So, and so that to me, the other foreshadowing was when she told, hey, don't you, it's not a good time to be reading this. And Nicole's like, well, I would like to personally, I found it. I'll take it personally to the police. And she's like, okay, as you wish.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, okay. Something's going on here.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when you see at the end of the movie, you're like, oh yeah, no wonder she said okay. So it's really kind of there's multiple layers of foreshadowing going on here that is so expertly done that at first it what it does is it takes away, I guess, your ability to blame someone. You're like, well, they can't be involved in this. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's misdirection. It's skillful misdirection, which I really, really love. And they did it so subtly and so easily.
Mm.
And then they come back and there's the damn purse. And so something's going on with this purse. And as Nicole has to borrow a car. So because she doesn't have a car, so she borrows whose car is it? I think it's Peggy's car. Yeah, she borrows Peggy's car. And even Peggy goes up to the purse to get her keys. And she's like, what are you doing? She goes, I'm just getting a handkerchief. So these girls are real slick. They know how to get in and out of this place without really being noticed. And here's the thing. Nicole's at work right now. This is how she gets paid. This is what she gets paid to do. And she's like, I don't care. I need to go.
Yeah.
And so she takes the keys, and that's when we see the purse is gone. Perfect. They're taking a trolley that's loaded up with dresses. And as it passes, we see the purse, the trolley passes, and the purse is gone.
I like to think about the actual how they did that shot. And I think that there was just somebody hidden behind the clothes that we see. And as they're passing by, they just grab the real simple shit like that, right? Just like it's just
it was Nicole. It was Nicole,
yeah.
And that's how Nicole snuck out.
Right.
And so it's like that's how they did the shot, physically, if you're movie making wise, but also story wise. That's how Nicole snuck out. And she saw the trolley and she just walked behind the trolley and grabbed her purse on the way out. And so she used the trolley to hide her because she has the purse later when she goes to Franco's. Mm-hmm. She don't have the diary, but she's got the purse. Yeah. So, that's a little spoiler territory, but that's this scene when she goes to Franco's is my probably my most favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, do you want to say what happens? Go ahead.
Oh man, so she goes in, she unlocks the door. Immediately, as she passes through the threshold, we see there's a knight, a suit of armor there. And so basically, she's in it. She's in Franco's antique shop, which I guess functions as his home as well.
Mm.
And so she the we see the killer as she passes the threshold reach and turn off the lights, which causes a weird strobing effect, a very slow strobe on these lights, where lights come, light flashes, it goes out, flashes, it goes off. It's very slow strobe. And so this happens. And what I believe is happening is that it's catching a reflection off of lights that are outside through windows. And so I may be wrong on that, but that is a kind of a hallmark thing on Giallo, where the light actually comes from. They did it in Malignant, when in the hotel, the lights are coming from exterior, from the outside.
Yeah.
So the red and the blue and things like that. And so, which curiously, those are the colors of police sirens, but the police, but yeah, weird.
Yeah.
But so we got this blue black light, and there's almost a comical scene where the killer is caught in the light and they stop moving, and it's like, but it's like, look, there they are. And then the light goes dim and they're there again, and the light goes dim and the light comes on and they're not there, and you're like, oh shit. So the killer is actually following the pattern of the lights.
Yeah, that
And
was a great
so
shot.
Nicole, of course, she can't see shit. She's running through this thing, and she's running through this whole building, knocking shit down, just and freaking out, because she realizes that she's being chased, and she can't find Franco. And so it's, to me, it's kind of like, and that's probably one of the puzzling things, and maybe I just missed it, but where in the hell was Franco? Because he shows up later, and I'm like, well, he was supposed to be there. Where was he at? And so maybe that's something I slept on or something like that, or blinked on. I didn't sleep, but I blinked on it or something like that. But that also kind of lends to Giallo, because there's some weird puzzling things that usually happen that don't make sense. They're not really focusing on making sense. They're just, telling a story. But this scene is harrowing. And the young lady who plays Nicole, she's ravishingly beautiful. As the entire cast, all the women are very, very, they're very distinct. They're very beautiful women. Each one has their own look, their own style. And I really like that. It's really and truly, for the most part, the entire cast is a very attractive cast,
Except for the dude that looks like Peter Lorre.
right? And I think they chose him because he looked like Peter Lorre.
Yeah, I think that's how he got
So
most of his jobs, probably.
yeah, it was a good thing he didn't sound like him, though, because that'd have been too on the nose.
Yeah.
Because Peter had that distinctive voice. But great actor, by the way. But
Yeah, great. M is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah. And
so this is where we do see that instrument that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
And he brings it up slowly to her face and drops it back down and kills her. Mm-hmm. And she falls to the floor, and he reaches and grabs her purse looking for the notebook. But it's not in there. Right. But he grabs her keys and he drags her into the store, and he drops the suit of armor on her, which seemed unnecessary. But then the killer takes Nicole's keys and gets inside her car, and the alarm starts going off, but he knows exactly where the button is to turn it off, which is interesting, because we failed to mention that earlier Peggy told Nicole how to turn off this alarm. So the only way that somebody would know to turn off the alarm so quickly is if they knew where it was.
Right.
I thought that was a really interesting aspect of that. So the killer drives away from the gas station, and drives away, and there's a gas station attendant who notices how fast they're driving away and just writes down the license plates in case, they need to for later. So later, Peggy shows up at her apartment, and so does Marco, who says that he wants to keep her company until I'm realizing now I may have their names flipped, because Nicole is the one who talks to no, No, I think we're right. I think so. Nicole showed up at Franco's, but she wasn't gonna go to Franco's. She was gonna go to Marco's. Marco was the one who had the cocaine problem. So that's how you were saying, like, you didn't understand where Franco was. He was supposed to be there. It was Marco was supposed to be there because he was the one with the cocaine problem. She was talking to Marco on the phone. So it was a little. I may need there. It's a bit convoluted, like you
So I
said.
thought that second call was, and maybe it's my mistake, but that's what they get for naming characters of O's at the end of their names. Uh, but maybe it was Marco who called the second time. Maybe that's why she didn't recognize his voice.
Oh, okay. So
Okay, but I thought,
yeah,
but I could have sworn it was Franco.
yeah, no, yeah, okay.
And
Either,
I'm like, yeah. So I think that's why she went to Franco's, because she had originally called him to tell him about the diary. And see, that's the thing.
I see, I see.
Everybody's
That's
involved in this plot, but they don't
exactly,
know
yeah,
how they don't even know how their own involvement is,
yeah,
which is typical of a giallo. It's like, I'm part of this mystery. I just don't know what part, you know.
yeah,
And so, and it's up to us to decide how important their role is.
yeah.
So
Okay,
it's
I
just
think you cracked
weird.
it. I think you're right.
Yeah.
So then later, Peggy shows up at her apartment. So does Marco. He says he wants to keep her company until the roommate arrives. She said she's okay. She just wants to go to sleep, but he kind of insists and begs, and so she lets him in. Inside, there's a figure wearing a black trench coat, and we think, "Oh fuck, is it the killer?" But it's not. It's Clarice, the maid. And
Mm-hmm.
so this, dismiss Clarice. She leaves, and Marco expresses his love for Peggy, who does not reciprocate. And Peggy reaches for her bag to get a cigarette, and I'm sorry, I apologize. Marco reaches for Peggy's bag to get a cigarette, but she yells at him to stop. She'll get it for him. She really did not want him reaching in there, and I wonder why. They both light up cigarettes, and then Inspector Sylvester calls Peggy, saying that they found her car. They found it unlocked and it's abandoned. Um, and she asks if it's been stolen, and she says, "No, I left it to my friend Nicole, who has to borrow it." So then Sylvester says that he's going to go visit her and talk to her. So at that point, Marco's like, "I got to bounce. I can't be here when the cops are here." And so she leaves. As soon as I'm sorry, he leaves. As soon as he leaves, she goes to her purse and pulls out Isabella's diary. And then the musical sting dun dun. So she stole that diary from Nicole's bag, and that's why the killer didn't find it in Nicole's bag. That's now it's making sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she quickly reads through it. She finds an entry that mentions her, and it says, "I caught Peggy trying to steal 10,000 lire from my bag. She started crying and told me she needed it because she's pregnant, but she can't deal with the husband. So um, she she lent her the money because she felt sorry for her, but tomorrow she's going to ask the bastard for 200,000 lire." So Peggy stops reading that and she rips the page out of the diary and throws that page into it. And then on second thought, just ends up throwing the whole diary into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
As she's doing this, the doorbell rings. She opens the door but finds nobody there. Suddenly, the masked killer grabs her and puts his hand over his mouth and drags her back into her own apartment. He closes the door behind her, and behind him, he drags her further into the apartment. He kind of beats her up a bit. Um, as he's doing so, he writes down, it looked like in German. It didn't look Italian to me, but maybe
Right. I
German.
noticed that.
Yeah. He writes down, or the killer, I should say, writes down,
Where's the diary?
where's the diary, right?
Yeah.
And she's,
In German, it didn't look Italian, but I
yeah.
mean, I don't know.
And then she says that she burned it. But the killer doesn't believe her and beats her viciously. Um, but before he can continue, like basically kill her, he hears sirens as the cops approach. It's Inspector Silvestri. So the killer grabs the notebook and Peggy's body, leaves the apartment, kind of climbs up the stairs with her body, like just dragging her.
Mm-hmm.
And then these hallways are huge, 20, 30 foot ceilings out of these apartment buildings. It's
Right.
massive, absolutely massive. It's a great shot of on the left side of the screen, we see the killer dragging her body up. And on the right side, Inspector Silvestri is arriving. Loved the shot.
The killer's timing was like perfect, and it's 1 second less, and Silvestri would have noticed somebody dragging someone up the stairs.
Yeah.
You know,
And honestly, like those halls are so cavernous. He probably should have heard somebody like dragging another body on the ground up the stairs. But
right?
we got to allow for some things,
Yeah.
movie magic and all that.
And then I mean, I think he knows something's wrong immediately. He just doesn't know what's wrong because Peggy's door is wide open and Peggy's not there, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, just her door being wide open, you can see the look on his face, like, something's not right here.
Something's
She
not
knew I
right.
was
Yeah.
on my way, you know. And then they go in there and they see, very subtle scenes of foul play, So, a candle's flipped over, there's some things on the floor, um, you know but this leads us to like to me, the most gruesome kill. Um, and man, just
Yeah. It's gonna be great. It's great. Yeah.
yeah.
So then Franco arrives in another location. Franco arrives at Ricardo Morelin's house, telling him that he just came from his antique shop and found Nicole's dead body there. And we also see that Christiana is there as well. So Franco wants Ricardo to give him an alibi. And Franco says he had gone to the antique shop to pick up Nicole and then says, for some reason, he says, "Don't you remember, Ricardo? We bumped into each other," which I thought it was interesting. Is he saying that Ricardo was leaving the antique
Mm-hmm.
shop? So are we trying to cast some shade onto Ricardo at that point? But Ricardo tells him to go to the police. He says, uh, "She's my friend, and she was found in my shop, and they're bound to blame Franco." But Marco refuses and tells him to call the police, or he'll call them himself. So then Franco threatens to tell the police about the IOUs that Ricardo signed to guarantee a 7 million lire loan for Isabella that Ricardo had no chance to ever pay back.
Mm-hmm.
So Christiana was surprised to hear this. And Franco reminds him that he doesn't have a penny to his name, and that's a pretty good reason to kill Isabella and maybe Nicole too, to make sure that they don't get hands on the diary. Ricardo claims to not know anything about the diary, but Christiana says, "Stop lying. I just told you about it." That was a bold faced lie.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, Franco says, "It's better for both of us if we each have an alibi, for each other's alibi." So back with Peggy, surprised she's still alive and she's blindfolded inside and up to a chair. She hears the masked killer coming down the stairs, and it's a fantastic shot. It looks so modern. This shot, I don't know. Look, maybe it was the transfer that we were watching that Tubi had, but it looked amazing. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I can't believe it's from 1964. It looks so good. And she says, "Why don't you believe me? I burned the diary." Then the killer beats her again, and we notice that there's a bell being heated above a fire. Do you want to say what happens here?
Yes. She is basically, this bell is heated, and it's you can tell it's molten hot, and the killer burns her face on the bell, holds her face down there.
Yeah,
And so you don't really see the skin meet the metal. You
hear it. Yeah,
hear the scream, and it's blood, just really, really blood curdling. What you see is the aftermath, which, and from what I've read, the actors who played Peggy wore this makeup for 5 days because it was so hard to put it on and to keep it off that she just wore it. Because it took multiple, they were doing multiple things and doing multiple things with the shot. And so the whole shoot for this scene took basically 5 days. And so she wore this makeup.
yeah.
So she didn't have to, kind of like Carrie, kind of like Sissy Spacek and Carrie, wearing the blood soaked dress. For
Bruce
She wore it.
Campbell and Evil Dead. Evil Dead 2, I think. Yeah, he did the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because the makeup chair sucks. I mean, even like I think Doug Bradley once, for Pinhead, once they made him into Pinhead, I think he stayed in the thing for 2 days
Mm.
because it was too much. It's like, hey, can you just touch this up? I'll just sleep in a chair. Um, you know, Now I've read that. I don't know how true it is, but I know that Sissy Spacek stayed in that bloody dress
Yeah,
for several days because it was just too much. She didn't want it. She was like, let's just do what we got to do and just get it over with.
yeah,
Because I'm ready for a shower now, but if I have to do this again, I don't want to do it. The stuff is sticky. They use Cairo syrup and all that. It's just nasty, nasty shit. But
yeah,
she wore this makeup because in this movie because the sitting in the makeup chair sucks. I mean, it's like it's not fun. And so it was better for her to leave it on. And it's gruesome makeup. It's probably the goriest part of the whole film. Um, and it it's yeah, they show it. It's shown tastefully for 1960 something,
yeah,
1964.
yeah,
I think the film still got an X rating, um, you know, for content, and that was after cutting 4 minutes off of it. But they left this shit in,
well, I'm
So
happy they
yeah,
did, but she also got burned on the hand as well. First it was the hand,
yes.
and then it was the face. It looks absolutely fantastic. Um, at the antique shop, the inspector is questioning Franco. He asks how Nicole got into his shop, and he tells him she had a key.
Mhm.
Um, and also that Isabella had a key as well. So the inspector asks if they did drugs as well. And he says, come on, you've got a drug habit. It's written all over your face. Franco says that may very well be, but that still doesn't make me a killer and that I have an alibi. And the inspector was like, all right, I haven't asked you about the alibi yet. And Franco's like, when are you going to ask me about it? He's like, all right, right now. And he takes him down to the station. So the inspector is questioning the gas station attendant who says it was definitely a man driving, but he didn't seem to have a face. So I like the misdirection that they're like, no, dude, it was definitely this. You need to be looking for this. And so like we as an audience are like, okay, yeah, it's definitely a man. And so the cops realized that there was a car alarm attached and that you'd need a few seconds if you knew where the alarm was, like we talked about earlier. At the police station, they have all the male suspects lined up, and then they have Clarice the maid picking out the suspect like in a lineup, but she's in full view of everybody. Like in other movies, like maybe American movies. I mean, I know American movies, but later on, the suspect or not the suspect, the witness would be behind
A
some
two-way mirror,
glass.
yeah.
Yeah, so the suspect can't see them and like do reprisals or whatever. But she's right in front. She like fingers people. I was like, wow, like that's very dangerous. So Clarice points out a number of people, including Marco and Cesare. Marco says that the inspector needs to look at Cesare. So Marco is like strung out. He is feeding for cocaine, right? For the booger sugar. So he's like you need to look at Marco. He's the killer because he's impotent. And then all hell breaks loose. And he continues to say, that's why he hates women. He kills them because he can't have them. I was like, God damn, he is out of pocket. He's like, that's why your wife left you. I was like, Jesus Christ, dude, just give this guy some coke because he is going off. It was hilarious.
Yeah, that's this movie too. I mean, I think it was originally some people have claimed it's like a dark comedy. I see it as a dark comedy without so much comedy. I could see how some things were funny, like this particular scene, but now it's just cringe, and it's like,
Yeah.
So, but I mean, times have changed. I could see how, especially, being how Europeans have a little bit more, they're a little bit more open about their sexuality than say Americans are and things like that, which we shouldn't be. We should be very open about everything. But especially then, during that time, that was the beginning of a sexual revolution. And so for them to say things like that, especially in that kind of context, it was probably found to be very funny. But who knows now? I mean, nowadays it was very cringe. I thought
Yeah.
it was a very cringe scene. I was like, ugh, okay.
Yeah, you could tell like he was basically he's a junkie who was in a corner, a drug addict. I'm sorry, he was a drug addict who's like in a corner and was just like lashing out at everybody. Right? He was like
Right.
hurt people. Right?
Yeah.
So at that after that, like so, Detective Silvestri detains pretty much all the male suspects, everybody that we've seen, including Morlacchi and uh, Lazzarini, because the
Hmm.
killer needed to know where the alarm was, and they both have driven the car before. And then
Right.
Franco and Ricardo's alibis were useless because the inspector called her after 11 and they said that they were together till 11. I'm like, guys, you got to get your shit together. Right.
Right.
But it kind of also proves that they didn't know that they didn't do it because if they killed her, they would know when they killed her.
Hmm.
Right. Otherwise, they're just terrible killers. They're just like terrible criminals, you know?
Right.
So later at the house of Christiana, the models sit around along with Christiana. Mr. Morlacchi calls and tells her that they're all being held by the police. Three of the models go home. They say, because they live together. Despite two of her roommates being killed, Tao Li decides to go home alone. Now we got to talk a bit about Tao Li, and I'm going to do this after you and I. I'm going to do this in my notes because we're kind of butting up against our time. But just so you know, like Tao Li is played by Claude Dentis, who is obviously not Asian, and so
Right.
she's just she's basically an Asian face for this movie, which is absolutely terrible. I'll go into that a bit more when I'm recording the section there, but um, this is absolutely terrible. But it's just part of the times what they did, and it was terrible then as well. But unfortunately, it shows up in this movie here. So then Greta, another model, does not want to go home alone. She asks if she can, because she lives out in the country. She wants to go home with Tao Li. Tao Li's like, "Nah, I'm good. You can go to your own house." And then later on, so they leave. Greta's so nervous she like backs into a tree, which is kind of comical, like you're saying, a bit of a black comedy there.
Hmm.
Inside the Christiana's house of couture, Christiana is alone, or at least she thought she was alone, and she sees a shadow running throughout the house. It looks so great because everywhere you look, there's mannequins in the house, and you think, oh, it's a shadow or is it a person? No, it's just a mannequin.
Right.
And then she ends up locking herself in her room. Greta arrives at her palatial estate. This place looks amazing. And she finds a body in her trunk. Just at that
Hmm.
time, the phone rings. So she runs inside, but nobody's on the other line. And just now talking about it, who is on the other line? Is it I guess we can't say without spoiling it now, but the killer, I would think, would be on the other line, right?
Right.
So she runs back outside to deal with the body and she drags it in. There's a lot of body dragging in this movie. But
Right.
yeah, but she drags it back into the house before her butler can see it. And Greta is kind of wiping Peggy's blood off of her off of her face when she's in her room and she hears. I thought she heard, but she didn't react to it. But we, as an audience, sees a hand come out and just strike the harp that she has in her room and make some noise.
Right.
But she doesn't react to it. So the butler comes up but he doesn't see it. That's right. So she ends up leaving. So Greta goes to her bathroom, kind of cleaning up, and she goes back and she's looking for Peggy's body, which she thought was behind a screen. But when she looks, she pulls the screen back, and now the body is standing straight up. That terrifies her, and then the body falls over her, and then we see that the killer was standing behind that body
Right.
and the pushes the body onto her. Greta's on the floor. The killer very quickly grabs the sofa cushion and suffocates Greta to death. Very quick death. I wasn't really
Right.
expecting that quick of a death here.
Well, I mean, considering who's doing the killing, there's a sense of urgency at this point.
You're right. You're right. And it's a different MO.
Right. And
Oh,
yeah.
that's right.
So there's a sense of urgency, which is why these killings they're meant to look one way. But now that here's the thing: all the suspects have been round up. Obviously, they don't have the killer, right? So but there's also a sense of urgency now, and so that's why we're seeing these kills a little quicker. and doing in different ways. And, especially like with, I think the next death is probably one of the more iconic deaths that's actually been done in multiple. It's inspired multiple death scenes.
So then I can't wait to get to that scene. But here we're back with the two women. There's a great shot of both women lifeless on a chair as Inspector Silvestri looks on. The police say that they're dealing with a madman here or a homicidal sex maniac who only kills beautiful girls. And they say perhaps female beauty makes him lose his mind and kill. So since they have all the suspects locked up, they have to let them go and start from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
So they said they found some footprints and they're matching the footprints to other footprints that were found at the crime scenes. At the police station, when they're giving back the suspects all their property, Mr. Morlacchi notices something that was not his in his package. It appears to be a notebook, and he puts it into his pocket. I don't remember this coming back. Did this come back? Do you remember what happened with this?
No.
Okay.
It's one of those. I think it's a red herring. I
Okay.
mean, there's a lot of them in here.
Yeah.
Marco messing with its throat right after we see a kill.
Right.
It's like, why is he messing with his throat? That's weird. There's a lot of little things that kind of, they're misdirections, and which, I mean, to me, they're almost true red herrings.
Yeah. So then it's around this time that I noticed that a lot of the lighting that I really love doesn't really happen throughout the movie. It kind of only happens when the killer is around, which I like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then back at the house of Couture, Tao Li speaks with Mr. Morlacchi and tells him that she's decided to take some time off and she's going to Paris tomorrow. Morlacchi asks if she's kind of still living at the same place, and she says that she was. So then we see, oh, why does he need to know that? So after she leaves, he locks his office door and opens up a fake bookcase. This movie even has fake bookcases, fake doors. I love
Yes.
it. Absolutely love it. The only thing is missing is a microfiche scene, but I don't think they had
Yeah.
microfiche there yet. But there's a fake door case. So he walks he walks through the door case and down a set of stairs and reveals the same set of stairs where we saw Peggy being held at earlier in the movie. He walks
Mm-hmm.
down, he noticed that Peggy is missing. He then looks in the furnace to see if something had been burned up. Just then, we hear off screen a woman telling him to search for everything. She says, she burned everything that could compromise you. And when I heard you'd been arrested, she got rid of Peggy's body. And then come to find out, turn around, it is Christiana from Christiana's House of Couture. She says she admits to even murdering Greta to give him an alibi.
Mm-hmm.
So right away we know that the killer was Mr. Morlacchi up until then, and now there's two killers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's what it was? It was always just Mr. Morlacchi, and then she only kills when she had to, right? That's how I took it.
I feel that that's the case, because here's the thing: the killer is even uncredited. The person who plays the killer, I think they have his name, but he's not in the credits, and it's obviously a male behind the mask. It's when we do see the reveal where Christiana is actually doing a kill, we actually see that she's being forced to do this, and it's
Yeah.
not something that she enjoys. But I mean, it's all part of the plot. I mean, basically it's a blackmail plot,
Mhm.
um, which is why they wanted the diary so badly, because it had the blackmail information in it, or it could have incriminating information in it, you know. And so that's the thing. It's like in a regular mystery, this type of plot would have actually kind of sucked, you know. But because it's in a giallo, and the way it's presented with these awesome, these beautiful kills,
Yeah.
that you let the little inconsistencies in the plot slide,
Mhm.
because the overall experience was so good. It's like, well, I'm not really going to think about that too much, because it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. people do stupid shit for stupid reasons anyway. In
Yeah.
real life, we see that all the time. It's like, why did the killer do that? That was so stupid. And so, maybe most killers think they live in Giallo. I don't know, but
Well, you're right. It's like this plot could be straight out of like a Lifetime movie, right? It's very, it's
right,
very
yeah,
basic, right? But all the trappings around the plot is what makes it great, right?
right, exactly.
So then
And
she
I
said,
mean, it's in a presentation.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So she says that she never thought she had the strength to kill, but she did it for him. She says that she used Peggy because she knew that she'd be home alone. She and so Morlocki and so Morlocki and Christiana had been on it together since the beginning. This all happened because that stupid idiot Isabella, her blackmail had become unbearable. They just kept giving her money, money, and more money because she found out that Christiana's husband's death wasn't an accident. So that's where we came from earlier when
Mm-hmm.
Inspector Silvestri noticed her.
Right.
So that was great. She says the more we gave her, the more she wanted. She says she asked for it. Her death would have been perfect too if only that diary hadn't showed up. But it's all over now, says a drunk Christiana. They've got nothing to worry about, nothing at all. But then Morlocki says that uh, they need to put a face to the sex maniac that the police are looking for, and
Mm-hmm.
he says that they need to kill one more time, and Christiana will be the one to do it. She refuses. She only did it because she knew that she would lose him if she didn't. So basically, he talks her into it, and we're immediately transported to Tao Li being
Mm-hmm.
murdered by the killer in a mask, drowned in her own bathtub. Then the killer removes her hat and mask to reveal Christiana. She's very emotional over what she's just done. She pulls out a straight razor and slices uh, Tao Li's wrists to make it appear as if she committed suicide. This is a great shot. This is very like oof because I shave with a straight razor, and I've cut myself in the past, and it is
Uh-huh.
like immediate blood, like
Oh
immediate
yeah.
blood. It's not like a little nick. And so like whenever I see a straight razor in a movie, I'm like, oh god, because I've experienced it. So then we see Tauli's lifeless body with her eyes wide open underneath the water as the blood slowly spreads throughout the water. Great shot.
Mm-hmm.
Great shot.
It's iconic because you see it again in other movies and,
Mhm.
especially in different ways. There's a film that came out like late 80s and it's called The White of the Eye. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not. I
I
highly
haven't heard of it.
recommend it.
Okay.
It's one of those movies though that once you watch it, you probably won't watch it again because you already know what's going on. And and David Keith is in it, not Keith David, but David Keith, the guy from the Lords of Discipline and Firestarter. And he's in it. But the killer in one particular scene in this movie holds a woman underwater and holds a mirror above her face so she can watch herself die.
Oh shit.
And there's no blood, but when we see that scene, I'm like, that's where they got that from. That they
Mm.
got it from this movie, from Blood
Yeah.
and Black Lace. And so to add the extra layer of I'm going to let you watch yourself die, that is that's some diabolical shit, man.
Yeah. That's crazy. Somebody else is ringing the doorbell and banging on the door very, very hard. And this frightens Christiana. So she grabs her mask and her hat and her jacket. She kind of leaves it all there. And she makes a breakthrough for it through the window. Then
Mm,
we see that the person banging on the door is Morlocki. So Christiana is out on the side of the house, climbing and attempting to scale down the building. She grabs onto a pipe. The pipe detaches from the wall and she falls. And we assume she dies. And then Morlocki runs. Back at the house of Christiana Couture, the camera slowly sweeps through the designer interior of this, dark palatial mansion. Then we see Massimo Morlacchi in his office attempting to open a green leather box. He reaches for a letter opener and jams it in a lock and opens it to reveal pearls and jewels and just a lot of like jewelry and stuff like that. So he hears a noise in the distance and he goes to investigate it. This is the part where I was talking about the sound design. It's extremely silent here, and all we can hear is his footsteps, and we hear like the wind howling in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Very creepy, very suspenseful. And
Mm-hmm.
then he hears the noise back in his office, and he runs to it, and he notices that all the jewels and all the pearls are now missing. And another great shot of Morlaki in the foreground, and behind him is that false bookcase, and it slowly creeps open, and he slowly turns around, and we see that it is the bruised and bloodied Christiana, hurt
Mm-hmm.
but still alive. She has the jewels in her hands. She says, "Are you surprised to see me, Massimo? Your plan was ingenious. It was perfect, just the way you like it, but you didn't reckon on the shop awning breaking my fall." She says, "Don't deny it. I saw you with the jewels. You planned everything. Um, you were also the one who recommended you sorry, you were also the one who recommended I use the ledge if I should get stuck in the house." So it was all his idea. He wanted her to fall off and die, but he tries to deny it. She says, "Now I know why you wanted to marry me in secret. You didn't love me. You're in love with my Via." And then, or sorry, Villa. Sorry, my last name is Villa, so when I see it, I pronounce it Villa, but it's Villa. You're in love with my Villa, not me. So he could deny it. He tries to deny it more, and he comes closer to her, and he says, "It was just an accident. I didn't mean it for it to happen. I love you so much, darling. We'll go away. We'll be together forever. I'll never leave you again." He kisses her, and as they embrace, we hear a gunshot go off, and then we hear another gunshot go off, and it's one of those shots where you don't know who shot who
Right.
until somebody falls down. And I wonder where that originated from. I wonder. I don't know. I didn't look it up. I wonder if that was here or if it happened somewhere else. But then Morlaki falls to the ground, dead. She shot him dead.
Mm-hmm.
So she makes it to the phone, and this is red phone like from Batman, the TV series. And she calls the police and asks for Inspector Silvestri. But as soon as she does that, she falls to the ground dead with the phone receiver swinging off the hook. This red phone versus a black background. Then we hear the music, and that's the end of Blood and Black Lace. So, what do you think of this last scene here?
The last scene is I mean, I'm not a big fan of scenes that explain. And so,
Right.
but I feel like that there had to be some explanation. So the reveal of everything it was done well. It wasn't an info dump. It was, kind of basically kind of conversational, um, and I think our minds filled in the gaps. We knew that this was kind of going on. We knew it from the Blackwell plot, and so our minds kind of filled in the gaps of, well, of course he's going to try to double cross her, you know, um, and so I think at that point in time we were, we're now watching this movie. Now we're kind of jaded to that, whereas someone else may at that time they may have thought that was kind of a new thing. I would hope not. I would hope that double cross scenes were probably pretty popular back then.
Yeah.
Um, but this movie is just it's basically it's a combination of so many other influences that, like when you mentioned, the two people together, there's a gunshot, you don't know who got shot. That's iconic. Um, but it fits for this. I mean, it's like, you almost see it in other movies. You're like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
really, but then in this, I didn't have that moment of, oh, well, they're really going to go there. I actually felt genuinely, surprised to hear the gunshots. One, I was like, oh, and then, to see that she had killed him, which I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense, you know.
Yeah.
um I don't know if she actually survived or not. I have a feeling that she didn't. um but I
Yeah,
mean,
I thought so. I
again,
thought she died also. Yeah.
yeah. um but the imagery added to that, the phone swinging, the black background, you have your colors. um it all lended to the fact that this was On paper, this was a very simple plot. It was very simple. They twisted it around, um, hit it, layered it up like an onion, and provided us with beautiful set pieces and beautiful kills, and created something that has inspired literally hundreds of other movies.
Yeah.
And so that's, when I did, this is, I regret not seeing this sooner.
Yeah.
It was like, damn, this thing really kind of set the tone.
I think something you said kind of strikes me. It's like yeah, I think that Blood and Black Lace is definitely more than the sum of its parts,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just the pieces that he used, it's how he used it, and it made something a lot better. So then let's go right into ratings. So we rate things out of 5 upside down crosses here.
Mm-hmm.
So out of 5 upside down crosses, what would you give Blood and Black Lace?
I would give it a good solid 3.5
Okay.
to 4. If I slide, it all depends on which side of the bed I wake up in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I want to keep it at, and here's the thing, 3 is good. 3 is really good.
Yeah.
So saying something is a 3.5 for me, which I don't really like star ratings or upside down cross ratings, but to play along, I thought this movie was exceptionally well done. There were some things that I didn't like.
Mm.
Um, there were some things that to me that just didn't work. But that's usually the case with any film I watch, especially Giallos. There's some things in a lot of these films that I find that don't make any kind of sense, and I'm like, well, what the fuck are they putting this in here for? Why? And it's like silly red herrings that
Yeah.
we didn't need. Um, but when you tie that in with the actual real skillful misdirection that they've done, it kind of overshadows that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would say 3.5 solid,
Upside
upside
down
down
crosses.
crosses. Yeah.
Cool. I think I'm gonna go 4 upside down crosses. I really Mario Bava is just one of those directors that I really enjoy all his work, everything that I've seen so far, and I want to get into it more. And Giallo is just, I love it as a genre. A lot of it, especially like in the late 70s, or even, still going on in the 80s. It's kind of died down now. Some people are still making some, but it got really, really extremely violent against women, and like just some of it is just like hard to take. And we see it even like in the movies that were not Giallo, but that were being made in New York, like Driller Killer and shit like that. Just like, it was just excessive stuff that at that point I'm not really into it. But like the early Giallos and the less violent Giallos, I really, really dig a lot. So I'm at 4 upside down crosses for Blood and Black Lace. So what we do now, Bob, is we'll do a recommendation of a movie in a similar vein to this. So it could be another Mario Bava movie. It could be another, another Giallo movie. It could be something that inspired Giallo. Anything that you have. I'll go first, and I'll recommend for people, if you haven't seen. Um, you were talking about Dario Argento earlier. Four Flies on Gray Velvet by Dario Argento, which is 1971. And just a quick like IMDb line of it: a musician is stalked by an unknown homicidal maniac who blackmails him for the accidental killing of another stalker. So Four Flies on Gray Velvet. And that's the other thing with we didn't even talk about the names for Giallos, right? They're absolutely ridiculous, right? But that's this one. That's my recommendation. Do you have a recommendation, Bob?
Yes, I do. It is another Argento film. Of course, I'm going to go with the bird with the crystal plumage.
Yes.
Um,
My first Giallo I ever saw.
oh wow,
Yeah.
yeah. I had seen. I think the when I years and years ago, I think I seen part of it. When I was young, like in teenager, I think I'd seen part of it
Mhm.
on TV or something like that, probably heavily edited. Because I do distinctly remember some of the scenes. But it's like, the giallos that that I watched back then were like, Deep Red, um, things like that.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a ton. There's the beautiful thing about it. There's hundreds of movies I haven't seen yet, and there's probably a handful that I probably will never watch just because I just don't think I'll agree with the content. But rewatching The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, And seeing that this was Argento taking Giallo and putting his own personal stamp on it, and it created it's like it took a genre and created the actual hallmarks that other directors used. It's like he took what Bava did and blew it up.
Yeah.
And that's, it's like, hey, if you're going to linger on something, I'm going to linger longer. I'm going to get a better close up of it. I'm going to have brighter colors. I'm going to have more contrast with the colors. I'm going to linger on these death scenes even more. And so he took his inspirations and blew them out and put his own personal trademark stamp on these things. That to me makes him, he's my favorite Giallo director. And so, and here's the thing, there's hundreds of them. There's hundreds of them. And so there's so many films to watch. Like I have not seen the one that you mentioned. I need to watch it.
Yeah. That's a good one. I enjoyed that one a lot.
Yeah. And so, but I also did like a deep dive of just pure Italian horror recently. So I watched a lot of folky films, and it's like there's Giallo, trademarks in those too. It's just they're more horror. You can't call them Giallos. You call them Italian horror, because that is in itself its own genre.
Yeah.
And so it's really there's so much out there, so much great stuff that if you start with Blood and Black Lace, if you're going into Giallo, I would start with that. Definitely watch The Telephone from Black Sabbath, because that's basically a pure Giallo. Yeah. That's one. It's a short film, but it's pure. And then check out, go into Argento and check out Bird with the Crystal Plumage, because that really kind of started it off right there. That got it in full force.
And I can't stress this enough. If you do watch Black Sabbath, make sure you watch the original Italian version, not the American cut, because they absolutely brutally murdered that cut. It's terrible. They cut out so much stuff. There's like I won't get into it if you haven't seen it, but yes, I definitely recommend that. So, Bob, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. This was so much fun. Once again, if you could just let everybody know how they can follow you, how they can support your work.
Yes. Of course, the podcast, This Is Horror. You can find us at, thishishorror.co.uk. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Bob Pastorella. My newsletter is Into the Obscuradrome. And I promise I will try to be more newslettery. Because I'm no longer on Twitter, formerly, known as X. I'm a little on Threads. I'm easy to find. If you know how to spell Pastorella, you can probably find me.
Yeah, and it'll be all in the show notes as well. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Live spooky, die spooky.